Welcome to the Special Needs Kids Are People Too podcast with Amy Bodkin, EDS. Amy is an autistic adult who also happens to be a school psychologist turned special needs consultant and public speaker. She's also a homeschooling mom to 2 autistic kiddos, a yoga instructor, a card-carrying Trekkie, and an all-around fun person. And last but not least, Amy is an advocate for seeing every child as a person, not a diagnosis. Because a special needs kid is just like any other child, just more so. Here's Amy Bodkin.
Hi, I'm Amy Bodkin, coming to you from my new and improved blanket fort, and welcome to Special Needs Kids Are People Too. Today, we are going to talk about that subject, that most dreaded subject of math. Personally, I like math, but I didn't always. Let's talk about what math is, first of all. Math is a language, and I think a lot of times we don't really appreciate what that means. I've told my kids when we first started doing math, and they're like, why are we doing this? I don't understand why I have to learn this. I've told them, if I created an equation for a yellow squash, and then I mailed that to someone in China, then the person who received my equation would know that I had sent them a yellow squash. And so math is a language that anyone can understand, regardless of what their spoken languages are. And it is a language that we use to describe the world around us. See, put that way, math is beautiful. And there's so many fun little areas that are math. Music is math. Art is math. Everything you see and experience in this world is math because it's the language by which we describe things. So that's really fun, I think, but a lot of times math is the most hated subject in schools. And I think the main reason for this has to come back to the way that we teach math. You know, they are saying in language research that the best way to teach a child a language is through immersion. And that's not how we teach math. We tend to approach it the same way that we used to approach teaching foreign languages, by paying attention to conjugations and grammar and things like that, instead of recognizing the importance and value of immersion and play and exploration, and just having fun. But you might also be thinking, hold on, Amy, how do you make math fun? One of the funnest parts about math is when you're doing handicrafts at your home, because that involves all sorts of measurement and, recognizing different properties and how different properties combine and all of those kinds of things. Cooking, that's another great example of, making math meaningful, basically. I also love reading picture books, especially with my kids, about math. We loved Circumference. That series was fantastic. We also love the Warlord series. There's the Warlord's Beads, the Warlord's Kites. All of those are great stories about math, which I really love. I love the book list, actually, from a website called livingmath.net. They've got a curriculum, but I find that with everything else that we do, it's really way more than what I want to do with my kids. But the book list on there is phenomenal. Some of the books you may not be able to find at your local library. Some of them can easily be found online. Some of them can't. But she just has a fantastic list of all sorts of different books about math. And sometimes it's reading a story together that excites someone's creativity in the way that they think about math. The circumference series definitely did that for us. We had a lot of fun learning about obtuse angles and acute angles, reading the Circumference and Angle Land book. So there's a lot of ways to have fun with math, not to mention things like apps and games. We had a board game when I was a kid called the Allowance Game. I've played that with my kids too. And there's also new like video games and apps. When I was a kid, we had DOS, and we had a game called Number Munchers or something, and it was little monsters that ate numbers. My kids have loved playing Prodigy. I find that a lot of times you have to set the grade level manually because, at least for some kids, it tends to advance them a little faster than they're ready for. But that's the outside dressings of math that make it beautiful and fun. You know, crafts, music, art, reading books, all the things that you love in general. You're just experiencing it with a different language. So I think that if we really took the time to think about math as a language and then applied what we apply to language learning, it would help a lot. I think one of the reasons why math is so hated and reviled is because of the way we do teach it. And most of the time the way we teach it, whether you're in a school or you're homeschooling, most of the time we get out the curriculum, we teach them the one way to do things, and we go in our nice linear fashion and finish the book and then on to the next book. And quite honestly, that pretty much kills any joy of learning. Because when it's boring, unless, of course, you're really good at understanding that particular curriculum and you really like being successful with worksheets. There are a few people like that. I am not one of them. But the thing is that math isn't done just one way. There's not one right way to think about or view or even do a math problem. There's usually multiple ways that it can be done or viewed or thought about. And each curriculum comes at math from a different perspective. And so different curriculums are better for different types of thinkers. If you have a highly, highly visual child, odds are they're probably not going to do very well with Saxon, especially if they're somewhat dyslexic. I haven't yet met a dyslexic who did well with Saxon. I'm not saying that there aren't any, but I haven't met one yet. If you have a child who's not a mathematical thinker, they think in words, and pictures just serve to confuse them more, then a curriculum like Life of Fred and also Raise for Today, those two are excellent for helping those more linear verbal thinkers who don't really respond well to visuals and number lines and clocks. Another great curriculum for kids who are really good with pictures and visuals and patterns is Mequon. That's a great one, especially if you have language delays, because it teaches everything almost in patterns. Matthew C. is an excellent choice for your more visual dyslexic type learner. It's also really good at helping that dyslexic learner to put language to math, like as in English to math. Although math can be understood without English or any other spoken language, a lot of times real-life math problems come to us in the form of language. And when we communicate with others, in our own country about math, we're usually using a spoken language. And so attaching spoken language to math is important. And it can be challenging for dyslexic students to attach language to math, especially if they're very strong in their visual, pattern, spatial thinking skills. If you have a kid who's a bit more balanced in their skills areas, then Beast Academy is an excellent option. It's a really good curriculum. Saxon, I think, would also work pretty well for most people who are more balanced in their skills. And And there's so many other math curriculums out there. That's just some of the ones I have run into, and I've seen a definite pattern where some work better for others. But it's something to think about, especially if you're teaching in schools or teaching to more than one child. The idea that the same curriculum isn't going to work equally well for each child, especially if you have any kind of learning differences or imbalances in the way that your brain processes, where you have a strong strength in one area and a strong weakness in another. And that's really kind of the advantage of homeschooling, is that we can pick a different curriculum for each child if we want to. Whereas in a school setting, you can't just buy a curriculum for every single child in the school. It's cost prohibitive. Now, you could, if you were in a group setting, teach every single possible way you could think of to think about, view, and solve a problem. However, that's going to be really difficult and possibly really confuse the kids. Because if you present 5 different ways that don't make sense to their brain, and only one way that does, and let's say that way's last, then they can end up getting a little bit confused by all of the things that they didn't understand properly. So that's problematic. Now, as far as teaching math goes, it's really, though, more than just a curriculum. And in a classroom setting, what makes a good math teacher is someone who, well, one, is passionate about math. That really does help. If you don't like math and you're teaching math, then you're probably not going to enjoy it. And odds are your students probably won't either. But aside from enjoying the subject, also being able to identify what kind of learners you have in your classroom and what kinds of teaching strategies speak to different learners, and trying to teach to the students that you have. And then also just spreading as much enjoyment and joy as you possibly can for learning about math in general, making it fun and enjoyable. Like we were talking about earlier, about making it more of an immersion experience where you're having fun and you're exploring and playing with new ideas and new challenges. Now, another problem, though, that comes up often, a lot of times people ask me, well, should I just use a calculator because my kid can't remember math facts? And they have the basic concept down, and we can punch it in the calculator and get the right answer, and so should we move on? Well, I once had a student when I was in schools. He was in 7th grade. He couldn't read, which was a whole nother problem in and of itself, because the child wanted to learn to read. He just didn't have anyone teaching him. But he was being asked to plug the quadratic formula into a calculator to come up with the right answers so that he could pass the test. And that doesn't really serve him, because if he doesn't understand what he's doing, then why is he doing it? Then he's just looking like he's doing what everyone else is doing, even though he's not really. And we could go on for hours about testing and teaching to a test and that kind of thing. But that's not what we're talking about today. So this child basically wasn't being taught math. This child was being taught how to plug numbers into a computer and have them spit back out at him, whether he understood what to do with that or not. And when it comes to teaching kids, you really do want to work where they're at. They thrive better when they have a solid foundation, math especially. If you're confused about addition, then multiplication's probably not going to go very well for you, odds are. But there's multiple ways that you can teach math. And there's also ways we can adjust when we're having trouble with memorization. Memorization trouble goes along with dyslexia a lot. And so for a lot of dyslexics, it takes them a very long time to learn their math facts. Now, does that mean we should stop trying? No, not necessarily. We can have simple games where we just keep practicing them so that we become more fluent as we go along. We don't have to have them perfectly memorized. It's not about where we're going. It's about working at it each day and trying to get better. But if you can't memorize them, but you understand the concept and you just need some kind of visual support, some people use a number line, but my favorite way to accommodate for that is using an abacus. If your child can learn to use an abacus, then they understand the math. That's not the problem. And it gives them a nice visual as they're working the problem to remember in their mind to help supplement memorization. You can also use an abacus to multiply 3 digits by another 3-digit number. You can use it to find the square root or the cubic root. It's pretty amazing what all you can do with an abacus. You can do some pretty advanced math with an abacus. And it's pretty user-friendly for kids in general because it involves moving beads. And there are actually entire books out there teaching you how to use an abacus so that you can use it for more complex computations. And there's also different styles of abacuses, so it depends on which one you choose to go with. We have a Chinese one. And I liked the way that one was set up. But it's kind of like choosing a math curriculum. It's really best if you see what will work for your individual child, because each kid's different. So I would highly recommend showing your kid several samples of different curriculums, seeing what appeals to them. Usually they're pretty accurate. Usually if a kid likes it, it's probably what they need. Every once in a while that's not correct, but for the most part, if they like it, it's what they need. And sometimes they like it for a little while and then they realize it wasn't the right fit. But that can be a great learning opportunity for them to figure out, oh, yeah, there are certain ways that I learn better than others. And then also we can further explore other beautiful aspects of math too.
And now, a word from our sponsors. Do you ever feel isolated, like you don't really know what you're doing as far as homeschooling your child who's got a different kind of situation than everybody else's kid? Well, a Charlotte Mason Plenary has created a special needs membership group with me, Amy Bodkin. This group provides an online community where you can connect with other moms as well as me, talking about things that are important in your life. We also have a weekly meeting on Zoom where we can build relationships and also dive deeper into topics that are of importance to you, whether that's behavior, academics, or just life in general. This group is for anybody who feels that they have some kind of a special situation in their home, whether that is due to a learning difference, developmental difference, someone having a chronic health condition, trauma, anything that puts your family outside the average. You can find more information at cmplenary.com/product/special-needs-membership.
Even when you're just doing something like music is learning math. Listening to music is math because you hear the patterns in the music. Enjoying a piece of art is math. Looking at someone's face is math. Faces have a specific shape and pattern and measurement to them. Anytime you go out in nature, you can find all kinds of aspects of math that are fascinating. Fibonacci sequences and even things that are not nearly as impressive sounding as a Fibonacci sequence. But learning to view your world through math. I think that's a fascinating idea that we often don't latch on to enough. And I think probably the reason that we don't, if you're in schools, you probably don't latch on to that idea because you've got a lot of pressure on you to meet certain requirements, and you've also got kids who maybe didn't meet the requirements for the previous year. And so you're doing your best to get everybody caught up, and so the focus has shifted more to a test. If you're homeschooling, I think a lot of the reason why we don't do this is because usually mom doesn't like math. And what we don't like, we tend to not share as much with our children because it's something we don't like as much. So one thing you can do to encourage your kids to like math is to learn more about math yourself. On the website I mentioned earlier, livingmath.net, not only does it have a list of great picture books, but it also has a lot of great chapter books too. So perhaps that's what you decide to do for yourself, for, as we like to call it at a Charlotte Mason Plenary where I work, mother culture. A lot of times, Charlotte Mason talked about this back 100 years ago when she was writing her educational philosophy, that mothers have children and they end up kind of being washed up because we spend all of our time focused on feeding and changing and bathing and taking care of these small human beings. And that becomes the entire focus of our world, which to a point it should be because they do need our attention. They depend on us for that. But mothers also need to be fed body, mind, and soul. And we don't take care of our own needs, then we quit growing as people. We become less interesting people. And we also eventually reach a point where we have become so stagnant that our children can surpass us and be a lot less interested in what we have to say. And so this mother culture that Charlotte Mason speaks about is talking about how we can explore new ideas and new topics in all sorts of different places. And the key is having some balance. You don't want to do all literature reading. You don't want to do all physical activity. You don't want to do all nature science stuff. You have to find some balance, but you're going to have this natural inclination to choose things that are more enjoyable to you. So it's a good idea to kind of take stock of what you like and what you don't like. And sure, enjoy the things you do like, but maybe periodically throw in something that's a little bit outside your comfort zone, something to kind of stretch you and grow you a bit. I personally have always been amazed looking at the patterns that you see with math. It's fascinating to me. To me, it makes it look like, wow, there's like some kind of thought process going on here. This isn't just, a bunch of random pieces I tossed together. There's a pattern going on here. I wonder, what does this pattern mean? What can it tell me more about? It's a science, a way of discovering, and a language, and a way of communicating, and a way of learning more about ourselves, and a way of connecting with each other. So I think math gets a lot of a bad rap because we spend a lot of time going through the mundane, especially in the early years, because we have a tendency to teach elementary math in a spiralized way where we repeat things over and over and over and over again. We teach a little bit, then we go to something else, then we come back around to the other thing and teach a little bit more, and then we teach a little bit more of the other thing, and then we come back around. And when we do that, some kids have a hard time figuring out where we're going. And so a mastery approach tends to work better for some of those kids. Usually your more dyslexic kids tend to do better with a mastery-based approach. Spiralized tends to work a little bit better for your highly verbal, less visual kids. But even with that, we spend the first probably 8 years of education, for some maybe 9, for some maybe 7, but we spend the first good bit of their education going through elementary math, and all it really is addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division with a variety of different types of numbers. That's pretty much it. So even if it takes you a while, you don't have to feel like you've got to rush through it all. Most of what you learn through a high school education can be learned in like 3 years if you're dedicated to learning it. So you really are at an advantage to work where your child is at developmentally, not where they are at in like grade level as far as their age goes, but where are they at developmentally? What is comfortable for them? Let's start there. And then let's go a little bit more. But also you don't want to advance their math to a point where you're starting to think, okay, maybe I need to pull out calculators or something. Because when we start reaching the point of pulling out calculators, odds are we're placing kids a bit too high. Or maybe we need to stop for a bit and teach an abacus and see if that doesn't improve our ability to understand concepts. And then when we get to higher level math, those can be quite intimidating. We can run into some problems, especially for dyslexic kids as they enter higher math. We're using more words with our math. It's fewer worksheets and more word problems. And so because of that, if you had a kid who had trouble with language development, that may be an area that you need to work to strengthen so that they can actually do algebra 1 and 2 and geometry. Geometry is more likely to be problematic for those who aren't highly visual because you have to actually be able to, see the shapes and get kind of a sense of where things are in space. So dyslexics tend to have more trouble with algebra, and your more verbal kids who aren't as visual tend to have more trouble with geometry. Now, another thing that has been coming up recently in schools is talking about getting rid of Algebra 2 and instead subbing in personal finance. Now, I am totally not against teaching personal finance because that's a really important topic and sometimes it never gets covered. And quite honestly, different families have different knowledge levels of what they can provide for their children. So having a standardized curriculum can be a good thing as long as there's options built in. However, subbing it for Algebra 2, I did not like Algebra 2. But even so, if I hadn't taken Algebra 2, I never would have gotten to calculus. And for me, calculus was where the light bulb came on. We were sitting there in calculus, and all of a sudden I figured out math is a language, and it is how we describe the world around us. And this is what they've been trying to teach me for the last 12 years. And it took going to calculus for me to be able to see that. And it was a beautiful realization. And I know exactly what helped me make that revelation. My teacher allowed us to bring in food so we could find the area and volume of food. And I have concluded that I'm an edible learner. I just really love food. So when we were able to find the area and volume of a pound cake I'd brought in, that was fun, and it allowed me to connect with the subject and to see why I was doing what I was doing and how it could be fun. So I think continuing to explore your relationship with math is important. And not all kids are going to get to Algebra 2. That's just the way it is. Different people go through math at different rates, and for some people, Algebra 2 isn't going to be something they get through in their high school career. However, I also think it's important to provide kids with opportunities to connect with math, to deepen that relationship. And some of the kids that we have, they may not even really be doing Algebra 1 work in high school, especially some of our special needs families. And so at that point, we have to think about, well, how are we going to teach math? What are we going to teach our kids about math? How can we honor where they are and still be giving them what they need in their high school credits? First of all, if Algebra 1 is not going to happen for you, then you don't have to worry about college requirements. So that's a plus. Because most colleges require Algebra 1, so odds are that's not going to be an issue. If you have a kid who is still working on basic elementary math, I would stick with the elementary math. But if you have a child who is able to comprehend books well, then one thing you could do is to create a statistics class that is more heavily on reading stories and books that explain the importance of statistics and importance of how we understand them. Personal finance is a good one. That one's fairly practical and definitely at an elementary math level, depending on how much you choose to teach. So that one's doable as well. I'd also take a look at livingmath.net. If you've got an older student who is needing some math supplementation but isn't ready for some of the more advanced math concepts, they have an entire curriculum of books teaching just math through stories. And so if you've got a kid who really enjoys stories, that's a good option. For kids who do not particularly enjoy stories, that presents another challenge. If you're not enjoying stories, there's probably a reason for it, and it's probably odds are you're not making movies in your head when you're reading a book, because that is how we remember what we've read, generally speaking, most of the time. And by making those movies in our head, we remember, and it makes it more enjoyable, and we can also understand what we read, because if you can't remember what you read, you can't understand what you read. So that would definitely be a problem to address before addressing a math issue. But in that particular case, continuing to work on the elementary math and strengthen that, and try to find a curriculum that works. It's about helping a kid discover what works for them, to make those connections, to have those aha moments. It's not slogging through a curriculum and trying to finish one for 1 year and one the next year. Most states in general, as long as you can show progress, especially if you have an IEP, as long as you show some kind of progress somewhere, you're good. Usually it's progress in a subject, not all of them, because not all children advance a full year in every single subject every year. And honestly, sometimes we have rough years, whether we have a 2-year pandemic or you have a death in the family or some other kind of tragedy that can impede progress. So those are things to take into account. But honestly, if you explore math with your kids, see it as an adventure. Invite more math into your life. Make it fun. Then I think for the most part that will help you see growth. But you're not going to get very far with your math achievement without also supporting language development. Although you can do some math without any language development, eventually math starts to involve more language development. And so you do want to help your child find some balance in all these different subjects because they're all interconnected. Like I said at the beginning, music, art, crafts, all of those involve math. So do picture books and chapter books. So many things involve math. So they are all interconnected. And that is the best advice I have for you regarding math. Keep looking. Don't feel like you have to stick it out with a book. You may get partway through the year. We did this year. We got partway through the year and one of the kids said, "This is not working for me." So we switched. When you switch, you definitely want to make sure that you go low enough that they know everything, because you don't want to have missed important steps, because different curriculums teach things in a different order. Mequon, for example, teaches addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division with single-digit numbers, all in first grade math. And then they reteach those same concepts with two-digit numbers and so forth. So that's a very different way of teaching math. Typically, we teach single-digit addition and subtraction, then we add in multi-digit addition and subtraction, then borrowing and carrying. But different curriculums do things differently. So there's nothing wrong with scrapping a curriculum and moving on, but you really want to be careful about where you place your student in the new curriculum. You want to make sure it's low enough that they already know it all, because there may be some bits and pieces that are taught in a different order. With my oldest, we did almost all of Mequon, and she loved it, and it was great. But she had some trouble with the language, using English with math. And Mequon was great because it didn't require her to have to use language with math, which was great at the time because that's where she was at. But now that she's getting into upper level math, she's finding that she needs those language skills. So we actually went back to the very beginning, all the way back to Alpha in Math UC. And she's blowing through it quite quickly. But it's a good review. It's helping her gain confidence. And it's also helping her attach more language skills to math she already knows. And that way, when she gets to the upper levels, it won't be nearly as hard as if we had placed her where we thought she actually was. And furthermore, there is nothing wrong with doing an entire curriculum and then doing another entire curriculum. You can do 2 elementary math curriculums throughout elementary school years, and that's not a problem. So I think sometimes we just put too many constraints on ourselves with the way math should be taught, and we feel like there's a right way and a wrong way. And quite honestly, we reinforce this with the way we teach math in schools, so it's not particularly surprising. But math is a living, breathing subject that changes and is constantly growing, and it connects with so many other subjects. And it can really be something quite beautiful that can add to your life. So go check out a book from livingmath.net. Go check out some kind of new craft that you can do that involves more measurement. Explore a topic that you never knew was connected with math. Go listen to a symphony. There's so many beautiful things to explore with math and to make it a true immersion learning experience for both you and your child. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.
We hope you had fun listening to today's episode and gained some new insights into the wonderful variety of people in our world. You can find out more about Amy's advocacy work at amybodkin.com. And remember, special needs kids are people too.